I want to go to the Arab world. Is there any question about Africa before I go on? Okay, so try and get through this quickly. And, first of all, here's the essentialist, civilizational. You'll see it expressed in a different way in Samuel Huntington's book, The Clash of Civilizations. This is kind of a historian of the region, the late Eli Kaddouri, who said, I'm not going to read it for you. What do you expect from the Islamic world? There's no tradition of democracy here. It's not the way they look at the world. Notions of popular sovereignty, representation, elections, and so on, independent judiciary. All these are profoundly alien to the Muslim political tradition. So, if you're looking for liberal democracy, don't look for it in Muslim majority countries. Now, the late Alfred Stapon explored this in a number of ways empirically. He also did a lot of survey research. And he said, well, let's take Muslim majority countries and break them apart into two groups. Groups that are Arab countries, they're members of the Arab League, and other Muslim majority countries, Bangladesh, Senegal, Pakistan, Indonesia, and so on. And what he found, now we're back to the Freedom House 7-point scale, where 1 is most free, 7 is least free. And if you just look at 2 time periods, it's a long time ago that he wrote the article now, about 10 years ago. But you see the point. There's a big gap in terms of levels of freedom. Outside the Arab world, there's much more political freedom and, in fact, much more experience with democracy than among Arab countries. Now we could, of course, add Tunisia to the list of Arab countries that have been democracies, and Tunisia still is. But his point is that the historical gap, the governance gap, is more of an Arab gap. There's something about the Arab world, maybe it's oil, maybe it's geopolitical competition, that's kind of steered it in that direction. It's not Islam as a religion, okay? And so he also asks in this article, which I think is on the syllabus for the long extended reading, if you're interested in particular regions, if you've got a view that, well, the problem with the Arab world is it's got very patrimonial, tribalistic cultural traditions that are very hostile to democracy, or maybe these are, and they are, in most Arab countries, deeply divided along some kind of identity lines. Well, it's true, but it's true in other parts of the world too. This hasn't stopped a number of African and Asian countries from becoming democracies. And the more homogeneous countries were also highly authoritarian, although in Tunisia now this is different. Okay, so what do the public opinion data tell us looking over time at the Arab Barometer, which is one of the barometers that you've been given access to with very nice, fun, engaging online data analysis tools? What we see going back to the first round of the Arab Barometer is the kind of Churchillian question again. Well, democracy has its drawbacks, but it's still the best system of government. Is anyone surprised by these numbers? Good. I'm glad you're saying so. I was. It's not what we're getting in the media, or in fact in most scholarly portraits of the Arab world, even ones that I'd say are highly sensitive and culturally respectful of Arab traditions. No one is expecting that 80 to 90% of the people are going to say that in general, having a democratic system would be good for the country.
Is there a possibility that because so many global leaders, even authoritarian ones, pay homage to democracy, and
right.
Democracy is such a trendy word that everyone wants to relate themselves to?
Of course there's a possibility. Yeah. It's a strong candidate explanation for what we're seeing here, okay? So again, we've got to drill deeper down below the D word. Yes, it's a very fair question. So let's look at their behavior. Did they vote in the last election? You can see it varies quite a bit. Do they follow news about politics? It's probably similar to other countries. You know, some do, some don't. Political reform should be introduced gradually. Pay careful attention to this. This was some time ago, but this belief in gradual reform is one of the most striking things we see in this barometer. I'll come back to it. And the percent now, we're going to get rid of the D word, okay, and just ask, would you favor having a strong leader who doesn't have one of the authoritarian options, who doesn't have to bother with elections or parliament? You don't see much support for that, which is odd, because that's what most of these societies have. Yeah.
Does an electoral democracy definitionally have to be completely secular?
Okay, we're going to come to that. Now, you know, there's a philosophical angle to what you just asked, and there's a kind of legal constitutional angle. The philosophical angle is, why not? You know, if you're a religious person and you think there should be a significant role for religion in public life, you know, that's a perspective. You can argue about it, and it's one that a lot of countries in this region, at least symbolically, feel strongly about. From a legal and constitutional standpoint, there's a very simple answer to the question, which follows pretty straightforwardly from the first lecture. If it's a role for religion of some kind of symbolic deference and respect, then that's on the spectrum of, you know, secular versus religious within democracy. Maybe on the spectrum of liberal versus less liberal democracy. And a lot of Muslim majority countries struggle with this, and the contest over the kind of democracy they're going to have, or over the founding rules of democracy, is around that question. If it is whether religious leaders should have a veto over public policies and should be the ultimate authority, as in Iran, then if you go there, you are getting off the democratic train to a system of some form of, you know, semi-democracy or competitive authoritarianism. But I'm going to show you now what people think. So thank you for anticipating the question. And now you see the mixed picture here. What do they say when they say, yes, we think democracy is always the best system? Note that this round of the Arab Barometer was being asked right at the time, end of 2010, early 2011, that the Arab world was erupting in the Arab Spring. And, you know, Jordanians were divided. Among the 80% who said democracy is always best, more favored a secular democracy than a democracy in which religious leaders would play a significant role. Democracy with some significant role for Islam. Now, even this was worded in a somewhat ambiguous way. So some people may feel, you know, it's more kind of veering toward Iran, though this is this is mainly Sunni Muslim country. Some may feel we want a more religiously conservative and faithful country with policy according to that, but we still want democracy. So even this, there could be variation within it. In Algeria, it's overwhelmingly secular. Egypt, then, it was as well, which is why I think the Muslim Brotherhood overplayed its hand and helped to bring about the coup in doing so. And in Tunisia, still more so overwhelmingly in the secular direction, which is why the Islamist political party, Ennahda, and its brilliant, brilliant leader, Rashid Ghannouchi, recognized, you know, that if democracy was going to work in Tunisia, and if they were going to be able to compete successfully, they were going to have to embrace the secular constitution. And they did, and that's a major reason why Tunisia has been so successful as a democracy, or at least has succeeded in sustaining democracy. Not much support for Iranian or the Sunni Muslim version of theocracy. And even a blatant secular autocracy, not much support here. So neither is it the case, the Arab Barometer finds, and Tesler and his colleagues, Mani Jamal and others, stress in the articles that are on the syllabus as kind of optional if you want to veer in this direction, that the more religious people, the people for whom religion is more important in their lives, neither is it the case that people who are more religiously devout are more authoritarian. They support democracy about as strongly as people who are not religious. At least 85% in each category say democracy is the best system. And you can read this here. Democratic values are present to a significant degree among Muslim Arab citizens, most of whom support democracy. And this is true in either direction. This was true in 2008. It's still the case, their data show, in the most recent Arab Barometer. So they conclude, there have been several rounds since then, that there's broad popular support for democracy in the Arab world. They don't see it as a Western form of government. There is division between more religious and less religious views of this. You can see here in the data from the specific Arab countries in the most recent survey, 2013, pretty strong, very strong, I strongly agree or somewhat agree, support that democracy is the best system, and I'll let you study this data, but they do fear that political reform could be destabilizing if it happens too suddenly. So they want more gradual reform. And certainly the traumatic experience of the Arab Spring has not changed that. I'm going to go quickly through the possible explanations in 1 minute. Modernization theory would suggest it's about development. That explains it. And again, I showed you this trend over time in Taiwan with growing support for a kind of index of liberal democratic attitudes. If you want to know the 6, they're here. And is this the result of increasing levels of income and education in Taiwan? Maybe. Is this the result of growing experience with democracy in Taiwan? Probably that as well. People with less education are more likely to support military rule in the advanced industrial democracies. You can see the difference here when we dichotomize the sample into those with low education here and those with high education, a very big difference. Very interestingly, I'm going to let you study this over your probably long weekend. People who are on the political right ideologically are much more likely to be authoritarian. There's a 20-point gap between left and right in Korea, 13 points in the US, than people who are on the left politically. And again, people with less education more likely to support military rule. There's not much relationship in Africa between educational levels and support for democracy. I think this is extremely interesting finding. Here again, you see if you've got greater wealth and you have more experience with and a higher quality of democracy. So this is the democracy index score of the Economist Democracy Index, 1 to 10. Countries that are higher on this score have more support for representative democracy, and they tend to be the higher income countries, so you can study that. And then some other possible explanations that I'll let you ponder that could help us understand, I think, if you look at different countries, why people have the attitudes they do. And I think one reason why there's so much support for democracy and freedom, openness, accountability, press freedom, and so on, is sub-Saharan Africa, is because they've got several decades of experience of the price they've paid for not having that, and they really want their country's governments to be more open, pluralistic, and accountable. So you got lots to chew on, and we'll shift to development next week.